Hello and welcome to our AI webinar. Today I'd like to show you few useful features on the output page. It's going to be Keystone and the Gridwarp. First of all, I'd like to mention what I've got in my setup today. It is a single projector output roughly pointing toward direction of my screen, and it's also two projector blend, which is fairly well done but needs some tweaking, as you would expect from desktop projectors. So let's have a look at the output page. What I've got here are my corners not fitting exactly or perfectly into aperture of the screen. My projector is slightly angled, so I will go to AI output page and assign my projector, assign the texture to my physical output number 2. This is where my single projector is connected to the server. And yes, it definitely is not fitting properly. With this image, it will be quite hard to see what I'm doing and if my image is properly aligned. I will use default media bank and select 16:9 test pattern, which will make my life much easier. I will go to AI output page with my selected and created full screen output region, and on the left hand side above the output region tools, you probably notice two more tabs. It's a Keystone and the Gridwarp. We'll look first at the Keystone. In order to see any changes on your output, you have to activate the Keystone, and you can either select one of the points by clicking at them, or select multiple points, and we'll do that with a Gridwarp in a moment. For now, I will roughly pull my corners to make them fit or to be close into the corners of my screen in the room. And now, to make finer changes and align it properly, I can use my keys, arrow keys, to fit the corners properly. I managed to drag this one by clicking on it, so I will use the arrows. This one can get back a bit further off. And this one has to go up a little bit and to the right. The main reason you would use Keystone on your media server or on your playback system rather than on projector is matter of losing brightness. Whenever you use Keystone on the projector will calculate, or will try to calculate and optimize brightness between what it would perceive as the furthest away point and the closest one. In this situation, we are applying all the changes on the output of our media server. So from projector's perspective, it receives 1920 by 1080 texture, which is not affected by any geometry control. So the projector is outputting its full brightness. But if you ever get into a situation where simple Keystone is not enough because your set screen is not perfect, is not fitting properly, is slightly angled, you can always use Gridwarp. and that's this guy on the right hand side over here. Gridwarp lives on top of the keystone, so rather than applying changes to individual corners, I can grab each of those and make some changes. So because my screen is sticking out a little bit in its top section, I will move it a bit lower, and I will do exactly the same thing with this point to make my output looked almost perfect. But whenever you are in a real life situation, especially if you are projecting from strange or difficult angles, you have to compensate for lens distortion, what may happen. You are able to add columns and add rows. Bit of advice, please allow a second or two for AI to process the new added point before you add the next one. Also, to make your life easier, you are able to make your grid and your points visible on your output. So now my image is overlaid with those white lines and the red dots, and I can play with and I can use show content to make sure that it's properly aligned, especially if it's something like a circle that still has to look like circle, or the curved lines getting into a blend area. Over here we can do exactly the same thing. We can select individual points and adjust their position, or you can select multiple points if it's the whole section that needs adjustment. If you did something strange, or you don't know where you are, you got lost with your Gridwarp or with your Keystone, you can either delete row and column, and it will preserve changes you already made. At the same time, it will remove the points added in the last step of adding them. If you need to start from scratch, there is nothing easier. You can always select new grid and start from the very beginning. So if I add for myself a few more points, make some changes, to make my image fit to the screen, I'm also able to export my Gridwarp file and reuse it in the future. If I will be getting back to the same venue, if I will be using the same projection area, I can use the same file, and rather than starting the whole process from scratch, I can load later on exported Gridwarp file and the warp file and use them as a starting point. So I will create for myself warp folder, and name it with today's date, and today is 23rd. Single out. So if I start with a new grid, I can go to my warp folder, load the Gridwarp, and you can see that immediately AI loads the mesh I created. Piece of advice, especially if you are doing that on a last minute basis, don't forget to disable your grid points and actual grid. You can do exactly the same thing on a Keystone page. If one of your points is far off or something doesn't look right, you can reset each single one of those. Or you can create new Keystone alignment and you can export it to whatever location. We would always recommend to save them in your distrib folder. So in my case it will be Keystone and it will be within that folder again 2018 10 23 one out. So if I reset those points, I can go to my Keystone folder, load the file, and apply those Keystone values to my output number 2. The next stage, which is much more interesting, especially for those of you who work with a manual projection, manual blend, soft edge blending, is using keystoning and grid warping for projector outputs rather than for single canvas outputs. To show you how to do that, I will go to my project browser, open file I prepared for myself earlier on today. AI will load it, and this time I've got fairly well aligned soft edge blend in our room here in London. It's not perfect, it's missing couple of points, or the pixels are not perfect as I would expect from office quality desktop projectors. But it's maybe in a show real life situation, it may be a matter of projectors warming up or lovely lamp is knocking them off when they try to focus their lights. So if I go to the output page, let's start with default media and the test pattern. If I go to output page, you can see that my projector 1 is assigned to output 3 and my projector 2 is assigned to output 4. I already have some soft edge blend applied to this to my setup, but actual alignment is not perfect. In this situation, having projectors still assigned to the outputs, I will select my widescreen. So I select the simple texture rather than projector, and I will remain on the same physical output highlighted. So in this case it's output 4 and it is my right hand side of a blend. If I enable Keystone at this moment, I can grab my output space and keystone it slightly to make it fit. So rather than trying to manipulate with position and change position of projector physically or in my in my stage construction page to match perfectly, quickly and effectively I can lose those few missing pixels in my overlap area, and this side of the blend is looking fine. And I will do exactly the same thing. Oops, I dragged it. Let me reset all of those. And if I select this guy over here and this guy over here, I will be able to correct geometry of entire output as a rectangle and spread those changes equally over the whole output surface without distorting its geometry. And of course, those parameters can be exported and used whenever you are getting back to the same location, to a similar configuration. And that would be everything for keystoning and grid warping in AI. If you've got any questions, please fire them up. And Richard, I hope sound was clear for you. Catch up with you guys later. Ciao.